Alright, buddy old pal, let's tackle a Disney show that I actually feel kinda safe talking about. Save the other one for later this month, possibly. So, breaking news, I'll be dropping a brand new poster in tradition of this year that you can only get during this spooky month, and when I do, you'll know in basically all the videos this month, but for now, make sure to cruise around to alphaj.show/merch and look at all the options there, and also be on the lookout for this year's exclusive Halloween poster. To say that I've been looking forward to this show would be a little bit of a stretch. After what I've seen of Disney's prior works, it has found a comfortable and consistent niche that appeals to a very specific type of fan, while also allowing for these shows to blossom for a few seasons. And I heard it was gonna be a musical, and I wasn't entirely thrilled about that, but you know, I went into this just seeing exactly how it plans to implement all of that.
Misery is declining in Cedar Valley,
while joy is on the rise.
There's nothing I can do. They opened a dog rescue. You can't expect me to compete with puppies.
We start off with quite a bit of information right off the bat. We have this ghost zone, which looks very similar to another ghost zone, but also a ghost council led by the chairman, the being behind the ghost council that just stands there menacingly, looking like the love child of Aku and the Grim Reaper. We see that ghosts are given tasks of making cities and neighborhoods miserable, and this particular ghost has been having a tough time in their designated area, Cedar Valley, as shown by this scanner of sorts, which will come back later, that determines how much joy or misery there is in any given location. If your performance is not satisfactory enough, they, and by they I mean the chairman, send you to the flow of failed phantoms, a vortex of ghosts probably subjected to eternal misery. The council is therefore left to attend to one ghost, Scratch.
What?
You are rude.
Rude and disgusting.
But we can't argue with your numbers. Your town of Brighton is truly a miserable place.
So in this episode, The Curse, we are introduced to the ghost, the main ghost, Scratch, voiced by Dana Snyder. But from a first impression standpoint, he's pretty good. I particularly enjoyed the contrast between him, you know, not being that well liked because of his general attitude and the way that he carries himself, but then also respected for his ability to keep his designated area miserable. I think the episode does a really good job at establishing that quotas do matter here, giving the consequences, the council, the crazy looking scanners, which again will be rather important later. We also see Scratch try to hang out with the council as they're going to a club, but gets snubbed for being too filthy and lower class essentially, which definitely could give him a bit of empathy, especially for what is to come. Like the introduction of the other main character, Molly McGee.
Ah, Brighton. You know what I see here? Limitless potential. What I see? A clean slate.
And let's keep it that way, Daryl. No more disasters, flammable or otherwise.
I make no promises.
We are introduced to the McGee family. Molly, the self-aware of being too friendly but still rather optimistic, adventurous, seemingly non-judgmental Thai American young girl who, quote, lives to make the world a better place. We also have Daryl McGee, who plays typical boyish younger brother who makes a good first impression, and I can't wait to see the development there. We also have Mama and Papa McGee here, Sharon and Pete, in which Pete has the most punchable face I've ever seen. It has nothing to do with his personality. He was just fun in this episode. I just want to punch it so bad. It's like an irrational need for violence. They're shown to be moving, as they move a lot, but as Molly would say later in the episode, they're making their forever home here in Brighton, the city in which Scratch is designated to make miserable. Which, considering the guy who died earlier for just sitting on a bench, he's doing a spectacular job. All of this trip is being chronicled on a video call to Molly's grandmother, who is a mixture of helpful but humorously critical and kind of sassy in a way that makes her sweet, but also kind of a decent authority here.
Ah, here we are, McGee's. Oh, hold on, that's not our house. This is our house.
Turn me around so I can see.
Pretend me back.
And while this does follow the archetypical format that Disney has been extremely comfortable with delivering for about 8 to 9 years now, I will at least concede that the girl entering the new world trope is at least handled here with a lot more tact and grounding to it. This girl wasn't shown to be aggressively destined for something right out of the gate. They didn't show that this girl was the main character because she was so unlike the others. And for what it's worth, Molly's sense of optimism doesn't seem forced. It's actually pretty endearing. Also, at least for now, she isn't living in the fantasy world and becoming the greatest that's ever been, but rather the fantasy was already in her world. So it's already a deviation from the norm. But beyond that, how's the writing? How's the characters? How's the comedy? How's the music? How's the dynamics? That will tell me more than this premise leaning on its priors.
Hey, those cobwebs are vintage.
Okay, Molly. Okay, focus up. You've never met a ghost before. Make a good impression. Ghost hug! Sorry about that. Here we go. Hey, does this go here? How about
The one thing that this show needs more than anything is a great dynamic between these guys. And from the perspective of the first episode only, it leaves a bit to be desired, but that's okay. I found myself liking the dynamic of Scratch being abrasive and Molly being too optimistic to care, and oddly enough, it was Scratch that I found myself being a little deflated about. He's shown himself to be a one-trick pony in a sense, figuring that if he could just scare Molly, it would solve his problem, and every time Molly no-sells it because optimistic tween, which just leads into Scratch only trying the same tactic again for like 80% of the episode. And I wouldn't say it was frustrating, but it was definitely limiting the potential for this episode to be fantastic and set itself to be on its best foot forward. Because I feel like, at least for me, if they leaned into Scratch being as good of a ghost as they said with different tactics and strategies, it would have made Scratch look better because it shows that the job that he's apparently good at couldn't be toppled so easily, but then also made Molly look better for making a friend out of someone who could have easily disposed of people who look just like her, as an optimistic tween. The reason that matters is that this entire episode is about the struggle between them accepting each other, and it feels as though the fight is smaller than it could have been because Scratch was either heavily nerfed or just dumb as a brick.
I curse you, Molly McGee! Wherever you go, whatever you do, for the rest of your days, I'll be there, haunting you, tormenting you, turning your every waking moment into an unending nightmare!
So this is the curse that bounds them together, which Molly no-sells. But as we learn in the episode, she just wants a friend as she's moved around a lot, and this essentially gives her one being that she can talk to essentially whenever. They also play around with color a lot, especially with the backgrounds when Scratch wants to get extra spooky, but it is a nice touch. Also, to be perfectly clear, while I do think that Scratch's performance could have been a bit more effective, I love the dynamic of optimistic and grumpy, and here it fits better than a few other Disney shows, as Scratch has lived there ever since he was assigned to haunt it, and Molly's family lives there because ghosts and humans don't follow the same set of rules. At least I don't think in this series they do. So for humans, they would believe that they own the house as well.
Molly McGee!
Ooh, hold that pose. Selfie!
As a person who wasn't too crazy about the songs within that episode of the Animaniacs reboot I reviewed a while back, this isn't too bad. Ashley Birch, voice of Molly, she has a pleasant voice, and I can see her and others carrying a song per episode decently well. I also think the song here works pretty well as it serves as the introduction to Molly's general personality and how it will clash with Scratch in an entertaining minute or so of a catchy song. We see here that Scratch is capable of possession and also holding physical objects, but we never really see that used in his repertoire of ghostly ways. However, when we don't focus on that specific criticism of Scratch, his vocal performance is excellent, as if anyone would think differently with such a legend behind the ghostly exterior. His facial expressions are also crazy, either when spooky or just completely over everything, and his connection with the Ghost Council is actually pretty interesting. I'd argue more interesting than the family so far, but everything can change in the episodes moving forward.
Dad's city planner job pulled us McGees from Ada, Oklahoma to Zuni, New Mexico, and everywhere in between. I've left behind a lot of friends. But Brighton's gonna be different. We McGees are making our forever home. Right Here.
Molly doesn't come off as overbearing, and she very well could. It's not like I've seen other shows, even on other platforms, have a very exaggerated, bombastic, or hyperactive main character and have a good show out of it. But Molly's definitely on the chill side. She fits between Anne and Luz as far as recent Disney main characters, and I appreciate how they went in and out of this moment. It was rather sad, and maybe they'll build on that, and I hope they do. But again, it just shows versatility, which will give this show a bit of everything it needs to build a strong fan base. The Curse does a very good job at planting seeds, and I think if anything, that's probably what's gonna push me through to the second episode, despite some of the negatives I'm putting here.
I am not a part of your problems.
Oh, no, come on. Come back, Scratch!
Let me...
The show effectively crosses its T's and dots its I's by explaining why Scratch can't simply leave, being bound to the curse that he thought would scare Molly and her family away for good. Again, it's those things that are necessary to build the story logic, which is important because a good story logic is invisible. It's like good sound quality or the use of sound effects within an animated sequence. Some may think that when I watch shows like this, I must have like a giant checklist in front of me of things that it has to cover, or it's just seen as illogical, but more often than not, I go into it rather empty brain, open-minded. A sponge waiting to be moist from the sink faucet, if you want to see it that way. Anything that I do and anything that I question is just something that the show brought up itself. And I actually never once thought about why Scratch couldn't just leave, because it just seemed like this was Scratch's home, so I just assumed that he would stand his ground in his home. A good first episode doesn't have to answer every question, but a good first episode should give you enough answers to want to watch the second, which this does.
Is there any way for a ghost who has accidentally cursed himself to uncurse himself? I'm asking for a friend, of course.
Ridiculous. You have no friends.
Jeez, dude, you didn't nearly have to kill him. One death is enough for this episode. And for the record, I'd rather have no friends than saggy Sally over there, who looks like a soggy foot if you put it in an isometric view. They go over the curse to show that it's permanent unless Scratch can scare Molly out of the house, which they've already determined is not an option. Remember how I said for 80% of Scratch's appearances, he just scares and wonders why it doesn't work, and it just repeats the exact same thing? Well, this is the only other significant time in this episode where he tries something else, and believe it or not, it's way more interesting than seeing him head-scratchingly try to scare Molly the exact same way for the 30th time. We don't get much development from the family except that they're afraid of ghosts, which gives Molly the power to act as the bridge between the two, as they're obviously not down with the haunting.
Out of the way, Molly. We're leaving this house, and we are never coming back.
Scratch doesn't mean to be scary. He's just, what are you hungry?
I am not hangry.
Do you want a snack?
I mean, I'd have a bite of something, but it doesn't mean I'm hangry.
Granola bar?
Not if it's carob.
It's endearing to see and shows that Molly can be a strong main character, being the liaison between the living and grumpy unliving, but also highlights how she bounces around the room, using her charm and charisma to convince each individual member of her family that this ghost truly means no harm, even when he wants to be, and that this is their forever home, including the ghost. Combined with a small peek at the backstory earlier, and some cool interactions with their family, we get to possibly my favorite scene within this episode.
In Thailand, many houses have ghosts. Have I ever told you about Santa Boom?
No. What's that?
A little house within your home to honor your ghost.
Tell me more about this, please.
So digging more into the tradition of superstition of Thailand, Molly's grandmother, Grandma Nin, as she's referred to in the show, speaks about giving a tiny home, food and drinks as offerings to honor the ghosts, which leaves Scratch begrudgingly satisfied as he was built up to be rather easygoing, who oddly wanted to befriend the higher ups within the Ghost Council and got a forever friend instead. However, towards the end, we get a really cool visual indicator. It goes down. And that tells me that this show is going to have a decent amount of continuity, just like its predecessors. Is the Ghost and Molly McGee really what Disney needs? In a way, if it wants to continue giving us more of the same, sure. I feel like that's fair to point out, given that Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network has a lot of these similar needs that it tailors its fan base to. I will say it is my favorite first episode of the recent Disney shows that I've covered, and honestly, I just hope that it speaks to something really cool or gives us a cool ride along the way to whatever destination it ends up at, or does something that'll make it break out of the gimmicky mold that it has. I'm looking forward to see what this offers, but until then, make sure to check out the merch at alphaj.show/merch, and thank you so much for watching. Take care. Alpha out.